We all know the story of the American Revolution. The colonists rebelled, declared independence, defeated the British, and created the United States. That's what they teach us in school. But when we dig a little deeper, the story becomes much more complex. The real question isn't how the Americans won, but how the British lost. Because if we look at the global situation at the time, Britain was an unrivaled superpower. So how did they lose a war to rebels who didn't even have a proper army at the start? Did everyone really want independence? The first myth we need to break is the idea that all Americans wanted independence. The truth is that only about 1/3 of the colonists actually supported the revolution. Another third were loyalist people who preferred tea and King George over freedom. And the rest? They didn't really care. As long as they could farm their land and stay out of trouble, the war didn't concern them. So, this wasn't a struggle of an oppressed people against an occupant. It was, in many ways, a civil war. Britain had too many enemies. Britain didn't lose just because of the Americans. They lost because they were fighting too many wars at once. While they were dealing with the rebellion in America, they were also fighting the French in Europe, the Spanish at sea, Native American resistance on the colonial frontier, and even conflicts in India. The costs were enormous, and their resources were stretched thin. Imagine trying to fight on 5 different battlefronts at the same time. How long could you hold out before things started to slip out of control? France was the key factor. Another major reason for Britain's defeat was the role of France. At the beginning of the war, the Americans barely had enough weapons or supplies to fight. But the French were secretly sending them guns, money, and even professional military officers to train their troops. Then, in 1778, France officially entered the war. Suddenly, Britain wasn't just fighting the colonists, it was fighting a powerful European empire. The French Navy cut off British supply lines, and their army supported the Americans on the battlefield. Without France, the American Revolution might have had a very different outcome. The British used the wrong strategy. Another huge problem was the way the British fought the war. Their army was disciplined, trained for large-scale organized battles. But the Americans used guerrilla tactics. They ambushed from the woods, used sharpshooters, and fought in a way the British weren't prepared for. Despite their strength, the British failed to adapt. They were used to traditional warfare, but the American Revolution was something entirely different. What happened next? Ironically, Britain didn't suffer much economically. Even though they lost the American colonies, they soon strengthened their control over India and the Caribbean, which brought them enormous wealth. And France? They spent so much money helping the Americans that their economy collapsed, leading to the French Revolution and the fall of their monarchy. And America? Yes, they became independent, but they soon faced massive economic problems. Taxes continued to rise. They even introduced a whiskey tax, which sparked another rebellion, known as the Whiskey Rebellion, just a few years later. Conclusion: Britain didn't lose America because the colonists were superior fighters, or because they had some moral advantage. They lost because they were exhausted militarily, economically, and politically. They were fighting too many wars. They failed to adapt, and once France got involved, their chances of victory disappeared. History isn't black and white. There's rarely just one reason why something happens. But when we look at the bigger picture, we see that Britain had far greater problems than just the American Revolution. If you found this story interesting, leave a comment and let us know which historical events should we analyze next. Would you like to hear about Napoleon, World War II, or maybe some lesser-known historical mysteries? See you next time as we continue breaking down the biggest myths in history.